You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
What is up, Los Angeles? Welcome to the LA Football Show, your RamsHouse edition. What's up, Ramley? Tough loss on Sunday against the Seahawks in the season. Season is over. We have a ton to get into as we're going to talk briefly about the game, kind of what went down, but the main focus, obviously, on everyone's mind is head coach Sean McVay, his future, and some players' future as well. So we're going to talk about that, some options of what that looks like and all that. So hope everyone is well, staying dry out there. It was just dumping outside of my house, Jamal. I don't know about where you're located, but it was probably raining some of the hardest I've ever seen since living in LA. And I've been here 15 years. You've obviously been here longer. But hope everyone's dry. Hope everyone's safe. Thank you all for tuning in. The show is always brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag today. Use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. Gets you a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. I'm pretty sure, well, maybe they don't yet because he hasn't officially decided. But once McVay decides, let's just say for the sake of this conversation, he decides to retire, there will definitely be odds on the next coach. And you can do that all on BetOnline. Obviously, Super Bowl odds are out there. I've placed a couple bets on that. So a lot of fun. Head to betonline.ag today. Promo code BELIEVE. All right. For Ryan Dyrud, I'm your co-host. Joined as always by the madman, Jamal Madney. What's up, brother? Happy Monday. You staying dry out there in Westwood?
Happy Monday, Ryan. Trying to stay dry. And, as bad as things are weather-wise for LA standards, we're not the TCU Horned Frogs tonight. And, so any day where you're not the TCU Horned Frogs in a situation like this is a good day. That was a merciful 65-7 game with Georgia. And we'll get into all of that, Ryan, when we talk USC and UCLA at later in the day and later in the week. But excited to get into it with the Ramley, and it feels like we're finally here where the real season begins for the Rams after about Cooper Kupp's injury and falling to 3-5, 3-6. We sort of anticipated this day to come, and the regular season almost felt like somewhat of a formality the last 7 or 8 weeks where let's just kind of get through these games, evaluate some players, and now let's talk about what's interesting and what's relevant and what's timely. So it's so ironic that just 1 year removed from a Super Bowl championship and being at the top of the pyramid, now it feels like this year, the real Rams analysis is going to be happening in the offseason. And the offseason is the real season for the analysis. And the real season was actually the offseason for the analysis. So I'm actually ready and very excited to get into, shall I say, the season opener for us in terms of analysis. So I'm enjoying that.
Yeah, I feel like we've even been kind of talking off season since Thanksgiving. So with this Rams team, it's like, we mentioned the game, say some fun matchups, but overall it's kind of looking towards the future, which, obviously not last year because they won the Super Bowl, but even since McVay's been here, we've never really had that because he's never had a losing season. Every year they've been in it. They've been competitive. I know there was the 1 year they missed the playoffs, but still a winning record at 9-7, and we're contending for a playoff spot. So it was so weird this year, basically the season being over by Thanksgiving and us looking towards the future and whether it was going to be a rebuild or run it back, get everyone back or what have you. So we're gonna get all that. Obviously, the rumors around Sean McVay, we're gonna talk about extensively, but I do want to at least start with the game, as that was the season finale. The Rams trying to knock off division rival Seahawks to keep them out of the playoffs. They fall in overtime, 19-16, in what was in my opinion, a very exciting game for it being low scoring. I thought it was a very, back and forth. It was, high on field goals. Rams did not have, great offensive output. Obviously only 16 points. Baker under 150 yards passing, so not a great game from him, but it was still a entertaining game. It wasn't like it was just, a piss poor, sloppy game. It was a very competitive divisional rival game. I want to start with this, Jamal. And I probably shouldn't start with this, but I want to start with this. So I try, and I say I try my best, but no, we've had some talk. I know specifically we talked about a Chargers recap. I kind of leaned into this and some others, but I try to keep the refs out of it because at the end of the day, players have to play. You have to make plays, and it comes down to who makes more plays in their team, who makes less mistakes than their team. This one, though, Jamal, at the end of the game, really felt like the refs did everything possible to give this game to the Seahawks. When you talk, and I'm probably missing a few, but you just talk about the really poor roughing the kicker call on the punt that was, even the announcers were like, yeah, that's not roughing the kicker. And usually when the announcers denounce it, and I think it was, who was it? Who was the in-house ref on the call? I can never remember who they have, but anyway, even the in-house ref was like, yeah, that wasn't roughing. And they always side with the refs. And he was like, yeah, that was not running in the kicker. You have that one. You have then the late out of bounds hit on Ramsey, even though it was really, he was getting blocked out of bounds. Geno Smith ran directly into him. I get it live in action. It kind of looked like it, but you can tell pretty clear as day that there was nothing Ramsey did. You have that one. You have on the interception by Diggs in overtime, the missed taunting call, which is the most clear as day taunt pointing to Bobby Wagner on the sideline with the ball. And I know I'm probably missing one or two, but it seemed like everything that could have gone against the Rams in those last 5-6 minutes did. And granted, the Seahawks capitalized on those, but it's hard to win a game when your team, your counterpart, is getting chance after chance after chance because of poor play calling. Your thoughts in the game of the refs, and do you think that actually had a legit reason for the Rams losing this game?
Yeah, Ryan, I think it was very perplexing. I think that it sort of stretched the bounds of what home field advantage is and can be. I don't want to lean too far into the conspiracy theory and all of those types of things, but it did feel like there was maybe a bit of an agenda where it was sort of in the best interest of the referees, TV, to have kind of the Seahawks win, to kind of put some more pressure and added pressure on that Sunday night game and kind of create some drama and implications. And, so I don't think there was something sort of malicious or egregious or premeditated, but oftentimes, leagues sort of run and say, hey, if it's a 50-50 call, sometimes it's in our better interest as a league for this storyline to play out or what have you. And it felt a little bit like that, a tad, especially with the game being played in Seattle and a lot of home cooking there. And I think it absolutely had a material impact on the outcome. I'm not sure that the Rams would have won because of those calls being overturned, but I think it's a different ball game. And I think it's a different set of scenarios, and the Seahawks would have had to make different types of plays at the end of that game to be able to prevail. And given those two teams being so evenly matched, given how well the Rams defense was playing, how opportunistic they were, how much of a struggle it was to execute soundly in the red zone on both sides, because A, there was just so much familiarity. B, I thought the level of chippiness and physicality defensively as spaces got less in the game were really at a high level. And then C, just I think talent-wise on the field, given injuries, given circumstances, it was roughly the same level of talent. So when you have so many things that are equal in terms of a potential outcome of a game, yeah, absolutely. The officiating can tip it one way or the other.
Yeah, and it was, and I agree with you. I'm definitely not a conspiracy theorist or anything like that. And if you really take a step back and think about it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was in the better interest of the league if the Rams won, because then both teams in the Sunday night game had something to play for. Whereas if the Rams lose, Detroit has nothing to play for other than playing spoilers. So you can throw that conspiracy out. Anyone that's like, oh, they just wanted it for the night game, but that would have done better. I don't know if it was just a collection of just egregiously missed calls. There was also I forgot about the intentional grounding from Geno Smith that wasn't called, which was another big one. And so, I mean, those are 4. And I think I saw a tweet from someone, there was even like 6 or something, but those are just 4 right there. So I don't know if it was just flat out mistakes and just compounded one and another. I don't know if there was an agenda. I don't know, but it was certainly unfortunate because I thought the Rams played well enough to win that game. Again, not like a juggernaut on offense or anything. Baker didn't have a great game, but they played well enough. And typically I'm in the belief, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but I do believe in karma. I think there's a realistic sense of karma and stuff. And when you see the fact that the Seahawks missed that not easy, but very makeable field goal at the end, you're like, all right, that's a makeup for all these bad calls. And then they get more in the overtime. But the bigger thing I want to say, and we'll be done with the refs now. It was unfortunate. It is what it is. If it was like playoff implications for the Rams, this would be a much hotter topic. Obviously, it didn't even get mentioned nationally because the Rams were out. But the bigger thing here, and this is, I think, what Rams fans should feel good about, which is what we're going to get to the conversation here in a minute. In that overtime, defense does their job right off the bat, right? Seahawks get the ball. They had just missed the field goal, but they still have momentum from coming back, tying it. Defense holds them. I think it was 3 and out, or it was very quick. They get the ball back. The Rams do. And you have a wide open Van Jefferson for, if not a touchdown, it would have been within field goal range and they would have kicked the ball to win the game. And Baker Mayfield, as fun as he's been in LA, as LA as he is, his personality fits. That's a throw. If Stafford's in there, ball game, or at least, setting up for ball game, because the arm strength, the arm talent is just different. And we saw it in that weather, in that setting, in that stadium. Baker, and maybe it was a fluke, but I think we've seen this throughout his career, just wasn't quite able to make that deep throw, didn't quite have the arm talent or arm strength. And so if I'm a Rams fan, I'm saying, okay, well, now hearing Stafford, he came out again today saying he's not planning on retiring. That makes you feel better. Like, okay, well, Stafford's our guy. We know he's our guy. Now he's said it. And seeing that one play, and I know it's a small sample size, but that one play, it's like, okay, if that's Stafford, we probably win that. Stafford, we probably win that game. So I think that's like a good thing to take from the loss, if there are any.
Yeah, Ryan, I think that's spot on. And we talked about this, that it felt like Mayfield was really going to have to ball out a little bit in this game to make the conversation interesting for the Rams organization about what you do with him. Not that, he's going to automatically sort of circumvent Stafford as QB1, but at least make the conversation interesting about, hey, do we want to pay him a little bit more and make him a backup, or how is that going to kind of shake out given his market? And now when you look at sort of the totality and the body of work, you see 2-3 over 5 games. The 3 losses were very pedestrian numbers and relatively pedestrian play. And then if you double click on the 2 wins, one of those wins, obviously he just gets off the bus, dusts himself off. But for 3.5 quarters, the Rams had 3 points, and then lightning strikes in a bottle, a lot of which was aided by some boneheaded personal foul calls by the Raiders to extend some drives. And so there was an element of a little bit of good fortune, some flukiness, some luck there, magic for 7.5 minutes, and then kind of an inexplicable game with the Broncos, who essentially kind of quit on their coach in real time, really. I mean, that's kind of what we saw. And the turnovers from Russell Wilson, it was a 17-0 game. And all Mayfield really had to do was kind of check downs and throw some safe balls to the tight end, and that became a 51-14 game. So when you look at the overall body of work now, you're still not convinced. I don't think he elevated his stock in any way, shape, or form. I don't think he decimated his stock any way, shape, or form. If you believed before this 5-game audition that Baker Mayfield was a credible NFL starter in this league, you're going to walk away maintaining that opinion. And if you believe that he was a guy who was good for a few highlights, but it cannot consistently quarterback a playoff caliber team, then that's absolutely the opinion you were going to have moving forward. And I think for us, it falls more in the latter, because the Rams organization has the luxury in being able to bring back a top 10, top 12 caliber quarterback in Matthew Stafford. And I think now that decision becomes a lot easier. And I think at least that's one area where you don't have to obsess and opine about, is the starting quarterback position. Now, I think what you need to think about a little bit is, who's the backup quarterback going to be? Because I think the one thing that it revealed this year was that neither Perkins nor Wolford is really a credible backup in any way, shape, or form. And even if Stafford is ready to come back, which is terrific that he is, multiple concussions now, spinal cord contusions, neck injuries. I mean, it's a concern level where he's 1 or 2 big hits away from maybe himself as well as his wife saying, okay, now we're really done. We sort of gave it one more go. So what do you do in terms of that secondary market at the backup quarterback position? Because the Rams are awfully thin there. But I think in terms of Mayfield himself, if he wants to come back and says, hey, I just love LA so much that I want to come and play for $1.5 million next year, then that's something you really want to think about. Everything that he talked about after the game was, how do I create the shortest path possible to become a starter again? So you can tell his mindset is there. And I think there's enough teams out there, Ryan, that are either were fringe playoff teams or just over the line or just under the line, that either have no plan at quarterback and don't have a high enough pick to go get a Young or a CJ Stroud, or even if they do get those guys, kind of need a bridge quarterback maybe for a year, and he's got an opportunity to audition again. But I think either way, and I know I've drawn this out longer than I should, I think more than likely we saw our last game with Baker Mayfield in a Ram uniform.
Yeah, I would agree. Especially judging on his comments that he sees himself as a starter in this league, which, seeing the openings, I think that's fine. He's obviously, we've said it all along, like, love Baker. I've always kind of enjoyed him. I think he fits in LA, but I mean, at the end of the day, if Stafford's here, he's not better than Matthew Stafford. So yes, there's been some fun moments and some great moments. And it, like we've said all along, it made watching the Rams fun again this year for those last, 6 weeks that he was here or whatnot. But if Stafford is back, he gives you a better chance to win, which is what it is all about. So I would agree with you. I think it'd be very rare to see him back. And you bring up an extremely good point, though, Jamal, that this really, we've been, and I'm not even saying me and you, but a lot of people have been saying it for a long time now, that the Rams backup situation is a dire one. I mean, dating back to when Goff was here, Walford was his backup. And you can go back to when Sean Mannion was the backup and all this. And it's one position that the Rams have been very fortunate that overall their quarterbacks have stayed healthy for the most part. And obviously last year it worked out and they got the Super Bowl. But this year really put that on the center stage, that yes, no team can afford to have an all-pro backup. Like, no one's saying that. Any fan that thinks that is, out of their mind, especially the way this Rams roster is constructed. And saying that last part, the way this Rams roster is constructed, and we'll talk very quickly on this and then move on to I want to talk Cam Akers quick and then Sean McVay for the rest of the time. But the way this roster is constructed, Jamal, like, if they want a viable backup that could spot start if Stafford were to get injured, or even come in and play a seasonable time and keep this team competitive, I honestly think the only way they do that is drafting someone in the mid rounds and getting a young quarterback that can come in as a rookie, that's hungry, that wants to learn. And I just don't think they can get a viable backup for the cap space they have when they're going to have to allocate that to other stuff, to bring in other spot starters because of injuries, because of guys leaving, because of what they've done with the cap. And we've talked all along about Les Snead has been a magician with the cap, and Tony Pastores, how they can kind of move money around. But you can only move so much, and they're not going to move a lot for a backup quarterback, which is why John Walford's been the backup, which is why Bryce Perkins has been the third stringer. And so in my opinion, unless they get a really sweet, honey deal, it's going to be probably a rookie in that third, fourth, fifth round that maybe, you see the likes of a Jarrett Stidham in Vegas, who just had like that one great start and has some talent, a guy that you can get those mid rounds. Do you think they can go after a vet, or do you think it's more probably for the draft there in the back?
Ryan, it's really interesting what you bring up, because I want to talk a little bit about, and I think that's the thing that is working for Mayfield and working a little bit against the Rams here, is that look at the supply-demand curve right now in terms of quarterbacks in the NFL. I would argue after this season, depending on what happens with Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, this is the lightest in terms of quality of depth of elite quarterback play that I have ever seen as a fan of the NFL in the last 30 years. When you look at who's truly elite at this position, I think it's Mahomes, I think it's Allen, I think it's Burrow, and we're sort of on the cusp of it with Herbert. I think there's 4 guys that are truly elite. And then I think there's another 4 or 5 guys that are not elite, but teams are sort of believing that, hey, maybe if things break the right way in the playoffs, or we find our way to play the right team, the right circumstance, the right stadium, the right weather, we can sort of make a run. Your Kirk Cousins, your Dak Prescotts, your Lamar Jacksons, your Jalen Hurts, and your Kyler Murrays, essentially, and Stafford. I think that's kind of the next 5 or 6. And then I think you have 22 teams that are absolutely clueless at the quarterback position, and that they would pay any amount to get someone that they believe could be a franchise player. And so when you look at the landscape of the NFL at this position, it's really slim pickings for that backup position, because anyone that is a credible backup in any way, shape, or form is going to look around and say 22 out of these 32 teams, I believe I can win the starting job given who's out there. So I think you're absolutely right that I think the Rams need to burn some draft capital on a credible backup if they're serious about it. But here's, I think, where it gets a little bit nuanced and interesting, because I think obviously the history of the Rams with the first round is much noted, and that's something that they don't have. Obviously, the big need moving forward is at offensive line, and I think they really need to spend their mid-round picks on some quality offensive linemen. What about getting an undrafted free agent by the name of Dorian Thompson-Robinson to be your backup quarterback next year with the Rams? Homegrown kid from UCLA. And you and I sort of started this train, Ryan, and you in particular, about some of the parallels in terms of body type, in terms of composition, in terms of scheme to a one Jalen Hurts. Why don't you let DTR come in? He's going to be hungry. We know that. You know, he's going to have a chip on his shoulder. We know that. He's really going to bring an energy to an aging core. We know that. So there's potentially an opportunity, even at an undrafted position, because I think DTR is going to be kind of a 7th-round pick or undrafted. I think there's a real opportunity at some value there at the tail end of the draft or undrafted, given the fact that you don't have the first-round pick and you really need to spend some of those mid-round picks at the offensive line position, at the trenches, and see kind of what's coming back, get a little bit younger at some core spots. So I think there could be a really nice match there potentially with the likes of a DTR and others that have been really good college quarterbacks.
I mean, absolutely would love DTR. We talk all the time. Any UCLA or USC players we can keep in LA, we are all for. And it actually, you know, it comes to fruition somewhat. At least it seems like every year the Chargers and Rams each take one from either or school. So would love to see DTR. Let me ask you this before we move on. We just saw him account for 6 touchdowns in the national championship. I don't think anyone has Stetson Bennett as a top even 3, maybe even 4, maybe even 5 rounds. He's definitely a mid to late round caliber quarterback, but obviously has championship pedigree. Guess what? Matthew Stafford went to Georgia. Stetson Bennett went to Georgia. If I can stay his freaking name. Bennett went to Georgia. Thoughts on him? You think he could be worth the late round pick, or do you think because of this game, he'll go a little higher and is probably too rich for the Rams even?
No, Ryan, I think it's spot on. I think he's a guy who is a decision maker. I think he's smart with the ball and he gets it out quickly. And, you know, it's got to be the right system. I mean, Kirk Herbstreit said it tonight, where you look at a Brock Purdy, for instance, and the things that he's putting together with the Niners, 5-0 in his first 5 career starts. And it's really just predicated on good decisions, knowing your limitations, getting the ball out quickly, not turning it over. And all of those things a Stetson Bennett can do, and I think do effectively. And I think he's certainly worth a look. And I'll take it even one step further, Ryan. I think both quarterbacks in this game are worth a look. Obviously, the bludgeoning that took place tonight kind of, you know, makes things look a little bit differently. But you have to realize that Max Duggan is also a Heisman Trophy runner-up this year, took a TCU team with much lesser talent, brought them to the championship game, and just ran into a team with far more talent on the offensive and defensive lines and was running for his life. But if you put him in the right situation, given his toughness, given his arm that's arguably better than Stetson Bennett's arm, I think there's some real gems here with Bennett, with Duggan, with DTR, with the likes of some of these other quarterbacks as well that can compete at a high level. So I think if the Rams are smart, and they have been the smartest organization in football the last 4 or 5 years, Les Snead is looking at some of these guys that can play and win at the collegiate level. So I think Bennett's definitely a look. He goes a little bit against my philosophy, Ryan, where I've always felt that really good NFL quarterbacks need to take a college team and elevate them. And the Stetson Bennett sort of falls smack in that bust area for me, along the likes of a Ken Dorsey and a Matt Leinart and AJ McCarron, where you just have advantages at every position, and all you're doing is just feeding your playmakers and not really doing anything. So there's an element to that for me with Stetson Bennett because his arm isn't necessarily elite. He's not an elite athlete. He's not that big a kid. So there's nothing there that screams NFL, but he plays with such a chip on his shoulder, wanted to play at Georgia for so many years, stayed, won the job, won 2 national championships. So that pedigree, that moxie is something that really attracts you. And he's going to be counted out again in the pros. And I think that meshes with his personality. So long story short, I think there are 2 or 3 guys here that you don't necessarily need to burn a 3rd or 4th round pick and get as much or more value in the 7th round or even undrafted.
Yeah, I totally agree. And obviously we have all offseason to talk about that and the draft and whatnot. But a guy like Stetson Bennett or obviously DTR or I haven't even looked to where, Max Duggan's value is, but it is probably later too. But for me, it would be literally, and I know this is what you're saying, but it'd be literally drafting as a backup. Like I'm not even saying grooming to take over when Stafford retires. We're talking about lifer as a backup, but a guy like a Chase Daniel, a guy that he's been a journeyman backup his whole career, but if the QB goes down, you have confidence you can still win a few games. Like you're probably not going to win a Super Bowl, but maybe if the team rallies, like a Nick Foles situation, team rallies around a guy like Bennett who's been there, won 2 championships, isn't going to elevate the team, but might not screw it all up if everyone else is healthy. So the Rams, to my knowledge, Jamal, have not drafted a quarterback since taking Jared Goff 1st overall. I think this is the draft where they do need to draft one, or if they can get a DTR undrafted, I like that, or some other guys, they will obviously take one undrafted. They do that a lot, but I think it's a year where maybe in that 6th, 7th, they look at a QB, one of those comp picks, but certainly don't get it twisted. We think the 2nd round, 3rd round, any of those mid-round comps, all go to the offensive line because that's most important because in the day you're protecting Stafford, not worrying about your backup, but that's something that does need to be addressed at some point because we saw it rear its head really head this year.
They're one hit away from having a bum run the team. I mean, I hate to be that blunt about it. So you got to think about it a little bit, especially given now Stafford turning 35 and his injury history. Offensive line takes all the precedent. But you got to sort of look at it as, hey, we got to at least have a plan. If we're not going to burn a 2nd, 3rd, 4th on a QB, got to have at least a plan.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said it, Stafford's going to be 35. So, I mean, even if let's say he plays next year very well again, stays healthy, maybe he still only has, I know he's got 4 years left on his contract, maybe only has 2-3 years left of like really high quality play. And so, obviously the golden ticket is Caleb Williams in 2 years, but that's a whole different conversation. So, all right. Well, let's get to the main course here. We've already taken more time than I think we planned, but that's okay. We're not up against radio time on this episode, so that makes it a little easier. Sean McVay.
Yeah.
It came out before the Super Bowl. I thought the timing was, I love how media likes to drop those nuggets wherever they find it. But before the Super Bowl comes out that Sean McVay is considering retiring, taking a lucrative job with Amazon or some other streaming service in the booth. Rams go on to win the Super Bowl. He decides to come back. More and more stuff's come out, plus just me and you, our own intuition and kind of knowing things that he was much, much closer to actually retiring, but kind of in the midnight hour was convinced by his players, by his coaches, maybe by his new wife to say, hey, let's try to win one more. You're only 36. Let's look at the legacy. If you can go back to back or win 3, you may go down as the greatest of all time. Let's see how this goes. Well, now this year's, we all know how it goes. And the rumors are out again, which I don't even think it could be rumors because they really never went away, considering it was a thing last year. But obviously, then I love when people, Jamal, are like shocked, like, oh, McVay's really going to walk away. It's like, this happened 9 months ago. Like, why is this a new thing? But anyway, I said back after the Super Bowl, I thought, truly believed, no sources, no one told me this. I just truly believed Stafford, Donald, McVay would all walk away at the same time. Now, I did not think it would be 1 year later. So I don't know if that's going to be the case anymore. I know Stafford's now come out twice saying he does not plan on retiring. We have not heard anything from Donald. I think he's probably a lot closer than a lot of people think to retire, to be on that retirement again. But for now, let's just talk McVay. So before we get into what if, let me ask you, in your personal opinion, do you think this is the last we've seen Sean McVay on the Rams sidelines?
Ryan, it's hard for me to assume that he is going to come back when now you have 2 straight years of this. And at some point, you are going to pull the trigger on it. And we've said it all year. I've said it all year. He looked tired from the start of the year. We called it writer's block. We called it he just looked burnt out. And I think some of the things that we've heard from Adam Schefter is just the toll of this season has really weighed on him in terms of the losing. One aspect that hasn't even been discussed that Adam Schefter talked about is that, the war on Ukraine and how that impacted his wife, who is Ukrainian, had a big impact on sort of his personal life as well. The fact that he is married to such a beautiful woman and they want to start a family. The fact that he has been around the game his whole life and has seen the likes of a John Gruden, the likes of a Mike Shanahan, the likes of others really work until much later ages, burn out, and kind of sacrifice other elements of their life. The fact that he does have the opportunity at 36 to still be the youngest Super Bowl winning head coach ever, make $20 million in TV, live in LA, start a family, have a beautiful life. When you put all of that together, Ryan, that's a tough proposition to walk away from when everything is humming, let alone when you're feeling a little bit strung out and worn out. And I think McVay is a very mindful individual and understands the history of the game. And I did a little bit of research, Ryan, and it was something that it was an area that I was curious about. And I think you have to take out the Bill Walshes, the Chuck Knowles, the Vince Lombardis, the Jimmy Johnsons of the world and sort of put those aside, because all of those gentlemen, legendary coaches, the Don Shulas, etc., all of those coaches were successful in a pre-salary cap NFL. When you look at the salary cap era of the NFL, salary cap plus free agency, okay, they were all successful. There was no cap. There was no free agency. The salary cap plus free agency era in the NFL started with Reggie White in 1993, and we're all the way here. It's been 30 years since we had the salary cap and free agency in the NFL. 3 coaches have won more than one Super Bowl in this era. One is, of course, Bill Belichick. I don't think McVay wants, no disrespect to the great Bill Belichick, the GOAT in terms of coaches. I don't think McVay wants to end up like Bill Belichick and be coaching into his 60s and 70s and be this curmudgeon and be so grouchy with the media and all of that stuff. So I think that's off the table right now, because that's what it takes to go and win 6 Super Bowls and be in 9 Super Bowls and all of that. But let's look at the other 2 coaches that won multiple Super Bowls. Both of them won exactly 2. One was Tom Coughlin, and the other was your beloved Mike Shanahan.
Yep.
And let's look at Mike Shanahan. Mike Shanahan won the 2nd Super Bowl because they won and they brought everyone back and they wanted one more go because they had a core intact. But Mike Shanahan, Ryan, was with the Broncos for 14 seasons. And Mike Shanahan won exactly 1 playoff game outside of those 2 years, those 2 Super Bowl runs. 1 playoff game in 14 years outside of 97 and 98. The other coach was Tom Coughlin. Tom Coughlin won 2 Super Bowls with the Giants 07-11, and you could argue the 07 one was about as lucky as you could get with the Tyree helmet catch and whatnot, and statistical probability would suggest that he probably should have ended with 1 Super Bowl ring instead of 2, but he's got his 2 Super Bowl rings. Tom Coughlin coached the Giants for 13 years. Tom Coughlin won 0 playoff games outside of his 2 championship runs with the Giants. So when you take a step back, Ryan, and you say, well, only 3 guys have won it multiple times. I don't want to end up like Belichick. These other 2 guys, one guy kind of got lucky and won another one with this helmet catch. The other guy kind of came back just because the championship team was intact and came back and won it the 2nd time. They couldn't win really anything else outside of that window and stayed for 14 years. When you look at that risk-reward ratio, Ryan, and you're already feeling a little bit strung out, you realize this is really hard to do. I gave it one more go. We brought the core back together for a repeat. It just didn't happen. I'm leaning 55-45, Ryan, that I think he's going to walk away.
Yeah. You've laid it out, I think, perfectly. And I've thought about that. I didn't look into the coaching thing. That actually is fascinating. Only 3 coaches have won more than one since the free agency era. And you look at those 3 that did it. Belichick had Brady for all those. Mike Shanahan had Elway in his, end of his career. And obviously after Elway retired, they didn't do anything. I know very well the Broncos have not done anything since Elway until they got Manning. And then the Giants obviously had, Eli Manning kind of in his peak for those. So you could also make the argument like maybe McVay doesn't see the prime of Matthew Stafford anymore. But I think that's a different thing and very plausible to some degree. But one other thing I'll add, and you may disagree with this, and so I'm not calling anyone out, but one thing that I don't love is you see whatever you want to call these rumors, conversations, whatever, and you have a good majority of the fan base and also just football fans angry, like McVay's a coward, retiring when the going gets tough. Oh yeah, anyone wants to coach when you're winning. First losing season, he's running away. Doesn't want to have to deal with the rebuild. This, that. I don't agree with that. I don't love it. If I'm being honest, I think it's a little disrespectful. I mean, here's a guy that's given everything, not only to the game, but given everything to this organization. I mean, these guys work 150 plus hours a week. And I think what I respect about if Sean McVay walks away, and you'll get to this point, I know you respect him, but I mean, you'll get to this point what I'm about to say here soon. But now that I am a father, and him being one of the big reasons that he's come out and said why he's even considering it is he wants to have a family. And the stories you hear of NFL coaches, and I'm not talking bad about NFL coaches, but the stories you hear about how elusive they are as fathers, and how at a time in our country and our world and everything where I think fathers are more needed now than ever before. They've always been needed, but I think now even more than ever because of what's been going on. And the fact that he says, you know what? I love this game. I love what I do, but I can make more money, work less hours, and be present in my family's life. Like, to me, that's great. By all means, I don't think it's being cowardly because the going's getting tough. I think it's being smart. It's realizing we have one life to live. We had a pandemic where many people lost lives. We have freak weather. We have all this stuff going on, and life is so short. And at the end of the day, who cares if you won 1 Super Bowl or 4 if your kids don't know who you are? Like I've heard stories of coaches that literally see their kids. There was a story, I think it was actually the great Joe Thomas was telling just recently when he was talking about how angry he was that Jeff Saturday got the Colts job. And Joe Thomas was talking about when he was playing, I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy that took over the Cleveland Browns coaching job, and how he only saw his kids on Saturday night when they got ice cream. Other than that, he lived at the facility or he was gone at all hours when they were home. To me, if you want to be a parent, that's a no-brainer. Like, I have all the utmost respect for coaches and whatnot, but I just want to be very clear. I don't think it's coward at all if a coach in their prime says, I value this more than this, and so I'm going to go do that. Then I'm like, awesome. By all means, please go do it. I don't find you a coward at all because I think that's much more admirable than sleeping on a couch in your weight room trying to draw X's and O's to see if you can go 9-8 next year. Like, yeah, I just think that's ridiculous that people say that.
Ryan, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's disgusting. And I think, let me give you 2 answers. I'm going to give you kind of the on the field answer, and then let me give you the off the field answer here. On the field, anyone that says Sean McVay is a coward literally is a completely illogical human being, because just go and look at what the Rams were under Jeff Fisher pre-McVay. You want to talk about inheriting a heap of just absolute crap in terms of as an organization. They were the worst offense in football. There were college teams that year, I remember, that I believe could have outscored the Rams in a football game. It was that atrocious. It was that bad. This guy inherits a Rams team that historically, outside of the Deacon Jones era, outside of the 3-year window with the greatest show on turf, has been a perennial doormat, Ryan. Let's keep it real here, for 50 years. So when you're inheriting one of the worst franchises in the history of the NFL. And in 5 years, you go to 2 Super Bowls, you win a Super Bowl, and you've set a standard that's so high that in the event that you have a losing season and want to contemplate retirement because you've given so much of yourself, not just for the 5 years with the Rams, not just for a previous 7 or 8 years with the Washington football team, but really since the age of 5 years old, being inculcated with this game and being obsessed with it, I think it's absolutely ridiculous and uncalled for. And the fact of the matter is, it's smart. He's going to get paid more to work less. Who wouldn't want that? I mean, it's just ridiculous. Why? Because of some weird sense that fans have about self-righteousness and sacrifice that coaches should make to their teams, when if they're placed in that position, they would do exactly what Sean McVay is contemplating doing. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And I couldn't agree with you more, Ryan, on the off-the-field comment. What good is money? What good is fame? What good is success if you don't have the love of your family, your friends, you don't have a support system, you don't have relationships? When people are on their deathbed, the number one thing that they regret in life is not, I should have worked more, I should have made money, I should have won this award. It's spending more time with their truly treasured relationships. And the fact that Sean McVay has the wisdom, has the forward-thinking element to his life design to be thinking that way, he should be commended. And anybody that's criticizing him for this, doesn't really appreciate the challenges of work-life balance in the 21st century, doesn't appreciate the realness of mental health challenges and burnout in the society that we live in, and doesn't appreciate Sean McVay as a person and just wants to treat him as some sort of a commodity, as a coach that's churning out victories for his team. And the last thing I'll say about it, Ryan, is, one of the coaches we absolutely love and treasure and respect, to sort of an infinite amount is Andy Reid. Andy Reid is probably going to be the 4th coach on that list here of multiple Super Bowl winning coaches in a post-free agency salary cap era. Andy Reid has gone through some very difficult challenges with his children, losing his children to suicide, taking their own life. And a lot of that can be traced to a lack of oversight, a lack of quality time with their fathers. And I promise you, the man that Andy Reid is, he would trade his Super Bowl ring in a second to have his son back with him and be able to spend that quality time. So the fact that Sean McVay is thinking this way, he should be commended. And I think anyone that is criticizing him for this, about being a coward, actually needs to reevaluate their own life and what's going on there and really focus on themselves. Because as the great Barry Bonds once said, don't clean somebody else's closet until your own closet is cleaned yourself. So I think this is sort of a moment of reflection for a lot of people that may be criticizing McVay.
Yeah, that's great. There's a great quote by the great Jesus Christ, also very similar. Don't try to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye when you have a plank in your own eye. So very similar
there you go.
Words of wisdom. But okay, so I want to end this with giving some. Well, okay, so I'll say this. So you said what, 55, 45? You think he's probably done?
Yeah.
I might even go higher than that. I think us as humans, and I try to only speak for myself, but I think we can generalize in a way. Once you get a thought in your head of like, oh, maybe I want to do this.
Yeah.
It means you probably want to do that. Like if you say like, oh man, I want to leave my job to go full-time LAFB. If I want to do whatever it may be, that's because that's what's in your heart. That's what you want. So the fact that this came out 9 months ago, we saw the season when it's now, he's getting questions about it again. He's basically said, I'm here now, but I'm going to take time and think about it. To me, that says his heart is like, you know what? I love it. Let's step away for all the reasons we just said. So I agree with you. Ultimately, I think he is going to end up retiring. So with that being said, we did some research, obviously, and done a lot of, we know the NFL fairly well. So let's just, we don't have to spend a ton of time. We've already taken a lot more time this episode, which I love. I think we haven't done a ton of long Rams episodes just because of the way the season's gone. So this has been fun. But who are some real quality potential replacements if Sean McVay does hang it up. We'll keep saying if for now because nothing's for sure. Now, I'm not going to start with you now, but I want to have you start first with some of yours. But this is what I will say to start. I kind of see it as two different avenues they go. And now that today Stafford came back again after being on his wife's podcast, but again today it was reported that he said, I do not plan on retiring. So all indications are that he will be back. But let's just, for the sake of this kind of segment, we can say I think there's two paths. I think if Stafford and Donald both return, I think there's a certain type of coach the Rams go for. If both of them retire, there's a different kind of coach they go for. That's my opinion, but I'll just start with you and then I can lead into kind of who I think goes which way. But who is some coaches you see, or we can go, I don't know, how do you want to do this? You want to go back and forth? Do you want to just list a couple?
Yeah, Ryan, let me share with you my list and then see what you think about it in terms of how it matches up with your list, and let's double click on a few. I completely agree with you. I think the approach of if Stafford and Donald come back is we've got one last dance in 23. And so how do I have kind of the Phil Jackson equivalent coach in the NFL for the Rams to get these veterans to align for one more championship push versus if Stafford and Donald walk away with McVay, we're in a full-on rebuild and I want a young, hungry builder. So
exactly,
completely agree that I think that conversation, you and I have said it for a few weeks now, that the Stafford, Donald, McVay conversation at the Beverly Hills Hotel in a private suite needs to happen here sooner rather than later. Not knowing the outcome of that conversation, if I'm listening, there's 6 guys that I'm excited about in terms of possibilities. There's, I think, some intrigue. There's, I think, some, traditional thinking and some non-traditional thinking. I would go DeMeco Ryans, Shane Steichen, Raheem Morris, Sean Payton, Jim Harbaugh, and Lincoln Riley. Those would be the 6 guys that I would interview, and it would
order,
give me
in order, or just those 6.
I would start with those 6 and see.
Is that like your order? Is that like your order though? Like number 1 is DeMeco Ryans?
No. It's kind of those 6.
Gotcha.
And then I would see kind of what comes back. Who's really ready to be a coach? 4 are obviously NFL guys. 2 are college guys. There's some that are more offense, some that are more defense, obviously, in terms of, their background and pedigree. But I would start there, and I would see where they fit in terms of some of these decisions. But that's kind of my 6 to start.
Yeah. And sorry, I cut you off because I think you were going to say something else. But no, I completely agree with those 6. So I'll just go into those, and I have a few others that I would add. I want to start with Lincoln Riley because honestly, I kind of, in a weird way, forgot because I think we talked about back in whatever it was, August or something, or even when Lincoln Riley was hired, it was like, this is probably, in reality, this might be a stepping stone for him to eventually take the Dallas job if he wants to go to the pros, being from Texas. And then we were like, well, hold on. McVay just signed, a 4 or 5 year extension. If he rides that out, that gives Lincoln nice 4 or 5 years, win 2-3 national champions at USC, and then just keep his home in, the Palisades or Palos Verdes, wherever it is, and just slide it into the Rams. I kind of forgot because it's only been a year.
Right.
But
right.
I mean, to me, that absolutely would be a no-brainer to at least interview. And I would hate for USC to lose him, but it definitely makes sense for him to stay here in LA. So yeah, I think that's definitely worthy of an interview. And I am surprised. Am I surprised? I don't know. I guess he doesn't get a lot anyway, but I'm a little surprised that to this point, there's been 0 requests for interviews for Lincoln Riley of the teams needing a coach. And partially maybe that's just because he is in the first year of a contract for a new college. So maybe many teams just think, hey, he's not going anywhere and we can't pay him that much. Go ahead.
Yeah, Ryan, I heard something. Now, I don't know how official it was, but there was a little bit of chatter on Twitter that the Cardinals reached out to request an interview for Lincoln Riley after Kingsbury went down, which kind of makes sense. I don't know how official it is, so I don't want to sort of start something in the rumor mill, but obviously Kyler Murray and Lincoln Riley were at OU together. Kyler won the Heisman with Lincoln Riley. air raid to air raid, but Cardinals may want to go in a different direction, but their personnel is sort of set up for the air raid, and they just sort of need a better version of Cliff Kingsbury. And Lincoln Riley is Cliff Kingsbury 5.0. So in that sense, it's sort of, in theory, it kind of makes sense that the Cardinals would reach out.
Yeah, and if their whole goal is like, we just got to do whatever it takes to benefit Kyler, that obviously probably would be the best benefit outside of a strong defense. Okay. So then going back to your list, so let's see, D'Amico Ryan's no-brainer. I think he's going to get a lot of interviews this cycle. It's his second year as the DC in San Francisco. It's very hard. The only outlier I can think of off the top of my head is one Brandon Staley, but it's very hard for a 1-year defensive coordinator. Now, 1-year offensive coordinators do it a lot more often, but
Right.
1-year defensive coordinators to get that head coaching job right off the bat. And D'Amico actually decided to last year go back to San Francisco to get more experience, which certainly he has gotten. And obviously the San Francisco defense is just nasty. So that I think is a no-brainer. I like that one. Shane Steichen, I like a lot. This is just a comment on Steichen. We talk a lot about, at least I for sure say, how the talent level in the NFL is so razor thin, and the coaching level is razor thin. Outside of like maybe the top 2 and the bottom 2, it is so close. And this is like the most perfect example, because Shane Steichen was here in LA just 2 short years ago as the OC under Anthony Lynn, and Chargers fans hated him, wanted nothing more than to fire Shane Steichen, just like they want nothing more than Joe Lombardi fired. And now Shane Steichen arguably is the hottest name in the head coaching cycle. So it shows that A, circumstance, situation, personnel has a big effect. B, just because things maybe don't work out somewhere doesn't mean you're a bad coach, but it also means maybe he won't be a good head coach. Who knows? But anyway, I think Steichen absolutely would be worthy of an interview. Sean Payton is, I think, this is the one where if your core all comes back, he makes the most sense to go after. I've seen a lot of people talk about how, well, the Rams don't have the draft capital. They don't have the cap space that would make him want to. Well, it's already been reported he wants to coach in LA, whether it was the Rams or the Chargers. It seemed like he didn't care. He just wanted either franchise. B, I think the Rams prove that they'll just get what they want. If they want you, they'll give up whatever to go get you. And C, obviously cap space, they've shown they can do whatever they want with it. So that I think makes the most sense. And I think he would be a very good coach in this, in the sense that they could pick up and not miss a ton of, obviously, I think, in my opinion, he's a lesser coach than McVay, but still is a top 10 coach in the NFL coming back. But the more I've thought about it, Jamal, and I before I kind of keep going on the list, I want to throw it back to you. When we've talked about Joe Lombardi with the Chargers running the Sean Payton offense, and how Justin Herbert, how great he is, just kind of doesn't fit in that style of offense, because he's got the big arm. You want to unleash it. You want to unload it. And the Sean Payton, Joe Lombardi offense is much more methodical. I don't want to call it dink and dunk, but it's efficient passing that is short yardage, one read, check it down kind of thing. Well, Matthew Stafford's also a big arm guy. I don't know if necessarily we would want him in that style of offense. Your thoughts over there before I keep going down the line?
No, I think it's a great point, Ryan. We've sort of talked about the fit there. I think the one wrinkle and why I would at least explore the possibility of interviewing him and having that conversation is the difference between a Herbert and Stafford in terms of arm strength is pretty negligible, and arm talent is pretty negligible. But one guy's 25 and the other guy's 35. And one guy is a spring chicken, and the other guy is sort of on the downside. So in a lot of ways, kind of the check down, dink and dump, getting the ball out quick actually sort of preserves you to then make a little bit of a deeper run the next year or two, and then maybe open up the pass game in critical situations in the playoffs and later in December and January. So that would be the one caveat, I would say, especially if you still need to break in an offensive line. You're going to draft a ton, but you know those guys are going to need to get a little bit of experience, get a little bit of comfort. So if you're still going to be a little bit shaky on the O-line and have an injury-prone quarterback, you need the ball to get out quickly. And depending on what happens with Cam Akers or a Kyron Williams there for support, So that would be my one caveat. I completely agree with you. I don't think a Stafford-Sean Payton relationship is long-term. And I could actually foresee a scenario that if and when Donald retires and the window sort of officially closes on this core, I could see a trade that Sean Payton makes for Stafford to get some assets and go get another quarterback. But I think it goes back to that earlier point that if you bring the core back for the next year, how do you want to coach this team? And I could actually see for the short term, a Sean Payton system help the Rams, given some of their deficiencies at the offensive line, as well as their durability challenges at the quarterback position.
That's what I wanted you to say. So I'm glad my alley-oop was well received, because I was giving some doubt that I hope you would then shovel out. So yeah, exactly. I totally agree with you. I think it would be a great fit. And the fact that he has said he wants to bring Vic Fangio with them. I mean, if you lose a guy like Sean McVay, if all of a sudden you have a Sean Payton and Vic Fangio, these Rams could be right back in business. So that's probably the kind of the standard, or not the standard, but the most beneficial hire, in my opinion, you could go get. Obviously, it's going to come with giving up draft capital, but hey, nothing new to the Rams. So why are we even having that conversation? I know a lot of teams value that. I know a lot of fans value that, but we're so used to not having first-round picks. So what does it matter one more year? Now that takes you out of the Caleb Williams sweepstakes, which is a different conversation. But if you're hiring a guy like Sean Payton, you're probably not drafting a rookie quarterback in a year anyway. So that's kind of what you have to be thinking about. So I agree with you there. To get to the last two you had Harbaugh. I'm not a huge Harbaugh guy, but I don't think Harbaugh would be bad by any means. I just think he's a guy that kind of wears teams out after a while. We saw kind of his ended in San Francisco was so bad that they went from Jim Harbaugh and they would rather have Jim Tonsula as their head coach. And then obviously he ends up going to Michigan. So nothing against Harbaugh. He's built a great program at Michigan. Obviously, he went to a Super Bowl with the Niners. I wouldn't be mad about it, but not one of my top choices. Now, to my top choices, and the reason why I haven't mentioned this yet, because I'm going to get to him.
The last one, Ryan, was Raheem Morris.
Yeah, exactly. So my top choices, Raheem Morris is one of my top choices.
Nice. Okay.
I think regardless of if you're everything I said about running it back or rebuilding, I think Raheem Morris fits fine in either category. Run it back, great. The staff knows him. He can keep a lot of the staff on staff. The players obviously know him. They all love him. He can keep the systems. He's been a head coach before with Tampa Bay and an intern with Atlanta. He's coached the offensive side of the ball, was the wide receivers coach when the Atlanta Falcons went to the Super Bowl. And obviously we know he's coached the defense. So he's kind of checks every box you want when it comes to being a head coach. And so he would honestly, outside of Sean, if Sean Payton's 1A, he might be my 1B. I love Raheem Morris, a lot of respect for him. I know he's a lot of respect in the league. He's already up to 3 interviews so far. So obviously he's probably going to get a head coaching job. My only fear with him, and this is nothing to do with Raheem Morris, but I think the fan base would just want him fired every single freaking week, which would be so frustrating. I mean, if the Rams, God forbid, start 0-1, it's all hell's breaking loose on the Rams organization, and Raheem Morris should be on the hot seat from day one. So that'd be my only concern, but I love him. Another one, if we're saying in-house, is running backs coach, Thomas. Why am I drawing a blank? Thomas Jones? I'm drawing a blank. Thomas Brown. Excuse me. Thomas Brown. Who, played in the NFL, has obviously been on the Rams staff now for a few years under McVay, elevated to assistant head coach this year, obviously highly respected, went from running back coach to tight ends coach. So has some versatility there. So I think if you're keeping in-house, he's another good one. Maybe if you hire him, you get lucky and Raheem Morris doesn't get hired away and you can keep him on as a defensive coordinator. But either way, that would be one. The other two, I would say, Jamal, that haven't been mentioned yet. Ben Johnson is an interesting one in Detroit. Now, definitely not a lot of wear and tear, not a lot of experience there, but obviously it worked out the first time around when the Rams hired Sean McVay. So you hit lightning twice with the great young offensive mind and kind of what he's done with Detroit. I know you remember, but for those that don't, last year, Detroit, Anthony Lynn was their offensive coordinator. Head coach Dan Campbell demoted Anthony Lynn halfway through the year, took over play calling duties, and then obviously promoted Ben Johnson this offseason. No one knew who he was. And Detroit obviously had a pretty rock solid offense and arguably almost made the playoffs. So him. And the last one that I'm kind of surprised has not been getting any interviews yet. And it's so early. Today's just Black Monday, so it's so early in the process. But offensive coordinator for the Giants, Mike Kafka. I mean, quarterback coach for the Chiefs for many, many years under Andy Reid, under Bieniemy, under other offensive coordinators that became Tom Nagy. Now the offensive coordinator for the Giants under Brian Dable. We see the turnaround they've had. So I think Mike Kafka, he played quarterback in the NFL, so kind of has that Kevin O'Connell feeling to him. So he's another guy that I'd be interested in. And I'll end with this because I've already talked long and we can wrap up the show. But I saw recently, and I think it actually was reported, Jamal, a few months ago by Charles Robinson over at Yahoo Sports. But I don't know if it was in an interview or a rumor or what, but it came out from Robinson that McVay had hoped that Kevin O'Connell was going to succeed him as head coach of the Rams whenever he did hang it up. And so I think the fact that last year he was so close to retiring, the hope was that, okay, Kevin O'Connell, you can just slide in and be the head coach here. And obviously Kevin O'Connell ended up getting a new job in Minnesota. So now that's not an option anymore, but I thought that was interesting. And so we could see that potentially happen with the Raheem Morris, with a Thomas Brown, who are in staff, who John's kind of molded in his own, likeness to hopefully take over. So I don't know, just food for thought to end there.
No, Ryan, I love that. And let me I completely agree with everything that you said and love the nuance and the context. One thing I will say, just sort of double clicking back on Harbaugh, I completely agree that he wears on you. I think that would be a coach where if you're blowing the whole thing up, kind of having him come in there as a rebuilder for 2 or 3 years, he could be ideal. And then once that young team is really ready to contend, you got to go get another voice. And so thinking of him in more of that bridge capacity. Let me ask you about 1 year, a little bit of a wild card. Obviously, you're a Denver native. What do you think about the DC of the Broncos? He's a hot young name as well. Broncos were out, obviously a very talented defense, minus the Rams game. How much of the defense of the Broncos is really attributed still to Fangio and this young kid kind of, having the keys to the Ferrari, or how much of an emphasis is really on this young man?
Well, I love Evero. I would love him to be the head coach of the Broncos if possible, but it's hard when you're that 1 year DC, and especially, but I think for the Rams, okay, let me say this. I think it would make a ton of sense for the Rams, but obviously if you're doing that, you're rebuilding the entire staff, which most guys would do anyway. But if you remember, which I know you do, but if those remember, Evero was on Raheem Morris's staff. Raheam Morris last year, first year DC. Evero was a secondary coach. So obviously Raheem Morris isn't going to stay and be under Evero. I mean, maybe he would. I mean, maybe you put your pride aside, but it's difficult to assume that's the case. So if you're going after an Evero, which I think they should interview him, absolutely. And obviously he's well known in that building, well respected. And that, again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but then you would definitely be blowing up the entire coaching staff, which you would do anyway with a Harbaugh, with a Peyton. Whereas if you say we want to keep stuff in-house, you go with a Thomas Brown or a Raheem Morris, you can kind of keep stuff intact. But in terms of X's and O's, in terms of leadership, in terms of player accountability, Evero, I think, would make a great head coach for sure.
Makes sense. Well, I think, Ryan, it's going to be a very compelling next couple of weeks as Sean McVay decides what his future is, and a very, very coveted job. And I think step one is, what does McVay decide? Step two then becomes, what does Donald and Stafford decide? It's I think some of the Stafford comments are interesting. I think he's sort of double downing on the fact that, hey, Sean, before you make a decision, just know I'm definitely coming back. If now McVay takes that and still chooses to retire, I wonder if Stafford is as adamant, or does it sort of pause for him to reflect as well? Sometimes there's a cause and effect relationship with things that isn't always universal. So I think McVay's the first domino, then Donald and Stafford, and then the coach. So it's, as they say in Drumline, halftime is game time. Offseason's the real season for the Rams in 2023. So I can't wait, Ryan.
Yeah. And I think and last thing, and then we'll be done here, but I think Andrew Whitworth is so close to the team Still, I mean, when we were at OTAs, he was there. I saw him like 3 times at OTAs and minicamp, hanging out in the weight room, hanging with the guys. But he's obviously with Amazon Prime on Thursdays. He's traveling all over. He's golfing. I know him and McVay are still very close. I know him and Stafford are very close. I think sometimes some of those guys are like, man, this guy's having all the fun in the world. Like that looks like the life right there. He can still be around football, still have an impact on it, still, be involved in the community and charity, but you're also not tied down to 100 hours a week at the facility, which I know these guys sign up for and love as well. But I think there's some aspect too, where some of them like, man, Big Wit's having all this fun. I'm kind of looking into that too. So it's going to be fascinating to see what happens. Obviously, I think we both agree we would prefer and love to have McVay back as head coach. Yeah. But again, if he's not 100% in it, then by all means, I think we think he should go and pursue, the rest of his life. And, I wouldn't count out him being a coach again one day. I think it won't be a Sean Payton move. I think he'll for sure be away 5 to 10 years and maybe make a run back later because he is so young. But I definitely don't think it'll be a 1 year go to a new organization like some people think. But either way, highly respected. We can't wait to see what happens. Tough end of the year for the Rams, but it's the offseason. It's the start of a new year already, which we can't wait to get into. So thanks to everyone. Thank you, Ramley, for tuning in to this episode. Please let us know your thoughts, your thoughts on if McVay retires. If he does, who are your top candidates? You can hit us up on Twitter at LAFB Jams is Jamal, at Ryan Dyer at LAFB, or at LAFB Network is the main channel. Or you can text us RamsHouse. Text RamsHouse to 31032 and let us know your thoughts on that. We'll be back later in the week for more Rams talk. For Jamal Madney, I'm Ryan Dyer. This is the LA Football Show. Talk to y'all soon.
You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.